Hey everyone, how are you today? So today in class, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be watching a video clip from the movie The Century. It's really a television series, and we're going to be watching the episode called Over the Edge as the world is really getting into World War II and America is attempting to stay neutral. So we're going to watch part of that video clip. We're going to watch a video clip from The Miracle at Dunkirk as the Germans are really kind of attacking France and trying to conquer it. And then we'll finish up that Over the Edge clip. And as kids watch, they're going to be completing their battles chart. It's under classwork. It says World War II battles. You can also use the pages in the book to fill it out, but we'll be doing the first three battles today. So these notes, most of the kids in class aren't really going to write these down. It's more so they're going to be just kind of adding things to their battles chart as they go. So all their battles are kind of in one place. But we left off yesterday with this slide. We kind of really got into the beginning of the war, and we said that the war begins September 1st, 1939, and that's when Germany and the Soviet Union attack. And I found a much better map online that I wanted to share with you. And you can see that the Soviet Union is really coming in from the east. And, when we think of someone attacking, I mean, this is a fully fledged attack. You've got Soviet troops coming in through Minsk, and we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different Soviet kind of units coming in from the eastern side into Poland. And then the Germans, oh my goodness, they're coming 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different units kind of coming in. And the goal, of course, is to get to Warsaw because that is the capital. And then you can force basically their government to step down. And we talked a lot about how the Polish knew that this was coming most likely because remember, Germany had originally asked for that city of Danzig. You can see it here at the top of the map there by the Baltic Sea. And the Polish had refused, and so they kind of felt like war was inevitable, that, Germany really wanted a warm water port. They wanted more land. They talked about it in Mein Kampf, right? He wanted living space or Lebensraum for the Germans. And Britain and France, remember, had pledged that they were going to help Poland no matter what. And now that Germany and the Soviet Union are working together in that Nazi-Soviet non-aggression pact where they pledged to take over Europe together, to no longer, fight each other, even though they have common differences, which surprised everyone, they come in and they're able to attack. And then my grandfather grew up in a farm somewhere here between Warsaw and Lodz, and somewhere in between that area, kind of where that arrow is at, maybe towards the bottom of that arrow by Warsaw, is where my grandfather grew up on a farm. And I was telling you yesterday how his life was forever changed, and really my life, because, the Germans invaded, he lied about his age, they took him as a farm worker, and then he spent the rest of the war working on a concentration camp, on a work camp, but not building things in the factory, more so working on the farm, really outside of the factory, but was still patrolled, by SS troops, was still beaten, still verbally assaulted, physically assaulted, so much so to the point that, he was able to, after World War II ended, and he came to America in, I think it was 1951, somewhere in, I don't know, the 1960s, 1970s, Germany decided to pay out reparations to all those people that they had wronged in World War II. And so my grandfather got a check from Germany every single month, his entire life, as long as I can remember it. And then when he died a few years ago, he got like a letter from Germany, like, like to us, like thanking us for like his service, apologizing like for, the actions that they took. And so we kind of talked about all of this yesterday, but this is when the war begins. And so this is then when Britain and France, of course, declare war on Germany and basically on Italy as well, because remember, they're in the Axis to powers together. Germany, Italy, and Japan are the bad guys here. And of course, when you can see all those German Panzer tanks compared to the Polish troops who are still on horseback, there's not a doubt that, the Germans are going to be able to win. And if you watch some of the video clips that I've provided, you'll see that the Panzers are not like the old tanks of World War I. Hitler has spent a lot of time here in the 1930s with the best scientists around developing new technology, trying it out during the Spanish Civil War, making sure it's fast, that it can go over bumps, that it can go over bodies, and it's going to be able to quickly come in and destroy the enemy. And I think I showed you this one yesterday too. I think this was the last slide where we were talking about how it's this blitzkrieg, this lightning quick attack, where he is first coming in with the Luftwaffe, the Air Force, and they are bombing airfields so that you can take out the enemy planes, you can take out the enemy factories, you can take out their military bases. Sometimes he was so cruel, he even attacked hospitals and such to destroy the morale of the people and to, kill the wounded. And then he's going to come in with those tanks and then ultimately ground forces to be able to really conquer an area. And of course, as he comes in and conquers Poland and realizes that they have such a huge Jewish population, that's when he slowly but surely starts to think about, what might this final solution be to dealing with the Jewish problem. The Einsatzgruppen, his death squads, are killing many Jews, but they're running out of bullets. It's costing a lot of money. He's putting Jews in ghettos. He's enforcing the Nuremberg laws in Poland now that he's conquered it. But he's already thinking about a final solution, which is when he's going to start building those, concentration camps, but more so those death camps. And he's really focused on building those death camps in Poland because there are more Jews there than there are in Germany, and he wants to eradicate this Jewish problem as he sees it in his racist ideology. And of course, they were able to take over them so quickly because they're just overwhelmed with troops, and the Soviet Union is helping as well. So we'll see some footage of this in that Over the Edge Century video as well. And there's not a whole lot that you need to write down on this slide, but you probably want to pay attention to the fact that, during the next few months of the war, and I can't remember if I left off on this one yesterday or not, that yesterday's video was crazy. I kept getting interrupted again. But there is this period of time called a Sitzkrieg. Some people call it a phony war. Some people call it a Boer war because basically nothing happens for the next few months. What we're going to see happen is that the Soviet Union, they do attack Finland. And they have a heck of a time on their hands trying to attack Finland because the Finnish are fantastic and they're excellent, at skiing. They decide that they're going to wear all white to blend in with the snow. They take to skis, and you can see those are people on skis with guns. And they would basically ski around to attack the Soviet Union as they were coming in to try to gain more territory. They're able to resist, kind of the Soviet invasion for a while. They're able to reflect, heavy casualties. Which really convinces Germany that Soviet Union is too weak. And that's part of the reason why, later he also wants to, attack the Soviet Union because he feels like they truly are weak. But he was going to attack them no matter what. He was planning on breaking this deal. It was just obtain Western Europe first, then take on Russia. That way he wouldn't have to split his forces so much like they had in World War I. But during these first few months, Britain and France and these other countries are really prepping for war. They're not mobilizing. They're not really ready. And there's not a whole lot going on. Hitler's not really doing a lot of invading. But it's basically like he took over some territory in the fall, and then he kind of, takes a break, so to speak, in the winter months, knowing that it's going to be very difficult for his troops to fight. So he only takes over a sparing amount of territory. And then as things move towards the spring, you're going to see in the spring of 1940, he is unstoppable. He pretty much takes over one country after another very, very quickly. Because his troops are so well trained, they work as a cohesive unit. He's brutal. He's read great battle strategies. He has the resources and the money. And, the technology is just there. And the other countries are still really struggling. And just to see kind of how successful, his battles are. So here's Poland, the first battle. That's September of 1939. And then, as I said, there's basically this downtime where Hitler really goes into massive production. The cat's out of the bag. He's at war. He's going to be mass producing military supplies, putting in a draft, getting his troops trained, and then basically just hunkering down for the winter. And then you can see he starts coming at him like gangbusters. And he's able to take Denmark in a day. The people of Denmark really didn't offer true resistance. They felt like they didn't have an army to fight back. He takes Norway in 2 months, the Netherlands in 5 days. Belgium and Luxembourg take about 17 days, and you can see all the countries on the map there. So he's able to kind of come in and invade. And then France is going to take about 6 weeks. But before you know it, he's able to take over all of these countries. And you can kind of see in the political cartoons there that the Germans with their gas masks are basically angels of death kind of coming in, invading, swooping in, taking over all, with Hitler kind of riding on top there in a creepy way. And no matter how many cannons or hand grenades, that you have aimed at the man, he's able to conquer them. He's really at the height of his power during this time period. And so some more stuff that you're going to be wanting to put on your battle worksheet. You can put it now. You can put it, on your own time and go look it up in the book. You can put it on during the Century video if you choose to watch that, however you want to do it, but you are going to have to turn in your battle worksheet at some point. It's kind of notes for this chapter, but it's also, an assignment grade. He does come in and he decides to take over France. And of course he wants to take over France. He's got all this anger and hatred directed at France because France was the one who planned the Treaty of Versailles. They were the most outspoken one. They got the most land and territory. They insisted that, the Germans were punished for their actions and paid these war reparations. But the French have become very wary of the Germans, so much so to the point that if you look at the France map, there in blue, they had built this thing called the Maginot Line, which is literally like a huge trench around France's border, and it's heavily fortified there towards the bottom portion of France, and it's supposed to be to stop the Germans from attacking. The French were convinced, really, for the past few years, really since 1938 perhaps, from what happened at Sudetenland, from the Munich Conference, some as far back even as when he started to take the Rhineland a few years earlier. Some people were always wary of the Germans, feeling that they were going to counterattack one day, and that the Treaty of Versailles was never a good idea. So they built this Maginot Line, this trench, thinking they'd be prepared for the next war. They'd already have it built to be better than their last trench. But the French are so behind the times. They want to continue fighting the last war, and the Germans are like, what are you talking about? Like, technology has changed. They're planning on still using, poison gas and such, but it's not going to be like as heavily used because they realize it could also hurt their own men, because now the Allies are willing to use it as well and they've developed it. But Hitler is doing all these experimental techniques. Like, he is, experimenting on people. He's thinking about other like poisonous materials. He's looking at other huge weapons. He's trying to, develop missiles and rockets and things like that so that you could launch them into the sky. But he's got his own basic, what ends World War II really is the dropping of the atomic bomb by the United States on Japan. And he is trying to develop his own kinds of, atomic weapons. He has his own code workers who are, typing this all out in code so no one knows what he's doing. He's doing weird experiments on animals. He is thinking of every possible way that you could weaponize something, even an animal for that matter, and use it against someone. So no, he's not like planning on fighting the last war at all. He's all about the next war. So that's not going to be where he invades. So instead, he's got like a sneak attack. The guy's always got a plan. He sends in, and if you look at the top of the map here, you can see the red lines are where the attack goes. So some Germans paratroop at this point into the Netherlands, and they're going to be going, a little bit, west of France here into like Utrecht, you see them, and into the Netherlands, and they're going to be paratrooping in. He's also going to be having them go like over into Belgium and such. So he's got, people being dropped out of planes as these paratroopers. At the other point, he does send in some ground forces to Belgium. And you can see the troops here as they go past Maastricht, maybe, through Belgium, through Leopold, and they're supposed to be going into Belgium. So when he's doing this, it like sends off like flags to the French. And the French are like, oh my gosh, he's going to come and attack us. He's doing the same thing as World War I. He's going to come through Belgium, destroy their neutrality and come and attack. And this is the smartest plan ever. So all of the French people this time, a lot of them were stationed here. You can see the different like units, the 4th, the 5th, the 8th, the 3rd, down by the Maginot Line. But a lot of them are like, okay, we're going to, some of them are going to move forward now. They're going to leave Paris. They're going to leave the Maginot Line area. They're going to move up towards Belgium to help protect them. Okay, so he waits till they get into place, and he only sends a few troops there, basically distract him. The vast majority of his troops are actually going to be coming through Luxembourg here, through Sedan, kind of south of this Montmartre. And my French is terrible. I've never taken French. And no one thought he could come there because it's such a heavy forest area. There's even some low-lying mountains there. And no one thought that he could take tanks through that area, but he does. And so what happens is that he brings them all in, and then you can see a couple of different units go, south towards Paris. This Rethal, this Bilote, towards Amiens, Abbeville. So he's got a couple of different units there. And then the rest of the tanks and the men, they're going to swing back further north towards Calais, which basically means a lot of the British and the French troops are now stuck in Belgium, and they're stuck near Dunkirk and Calais, and they're pretty much surrounded. The rest of the French troops that he has to fight here really aren't that many, and so he's able to bring them in. So this whole Maginot Line thing didn't work. Surround them, force them to surrender, march to Paris, force the government to surrender. And so he takes Paris in basically a matter of 6 weeks. While all this, you can see the bottom picture there with him by Paris, France. While all this is happening, and he is surrounding, these French and British troops who had come to help the French and the Belgium that are here in Belgium and France, the British government decides they're going to retreat. and it's kind of like a covered up thing. They don't want people to know, but they're like, yeah, we could have like some of our best British troops, their British Expeditionary Force, lost this early in the war, completely surrounded, taken as prisoners of war, or Hitler might just execute them all, who knows. And so they decide they're going to retreat. And so they're going to make their big retreat here at Dunkirk. And so Britain, the United Kingdom here, is going to try to cross the English Channel and bring over boats from Dover to Dunkirk. But they can't basically get them there fast enough. And in the meantime, Hitler's troops are annihilating them. A lot of the men are basically waiting on this beach. And if you watch the video clip, you'll see this. They're waiting for someone to pick them up. And so Hitler's Luftwaffe would just fly over and just kill people on the beach, basically. For whatever reason, Hitler had some issues. We're still not sure to the day what it was, if he was fighting over supply lines or if there were internal arguments, if he was ill, we just don't know. But basically, while he was indecisive about whether his troops should move towards Paris, because he was taking Paris at basically the same time that Dunkirk was happening, or if he should have his men focus more on Dunkirk, he was indecisive for 2 or 3 days, and it was enough time for the British to get enough boats over there to evacuate most of the men at Dunkirk. And so they call it the Miracle of Dunkirk, because in this Operation Dynamo, they're able to basically evacuate about 300,000 British troops safely, but thousands of men do die, and about 90,000 weapons were destroyed, 120,000 vehicles were lost, many people were picked off on those beaches by the Luftwaffe. Men suffered some serious PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, as they were basically just waiting to die on this beach and waiting to get picked up. And innocent people, like normal people, participated in this operation. We saw people who were fishermen and people just who were wealthy that owned a boat. They came in and tried to help, and do their bit and try to save these men who were stranded over there as well. And the idea was to get back to Great Britain because clearly it was next. Now, as far as major people, we didn't have a whole lot of major people to mention in Poland. But as far as France, Hitler, now that he is conquering all this territory, he basically wants each country to be loyal to him. So he takes out the true leader in each government and he puts in a new leader who is loyal to him. So in France, the northern portion of it is going to be called occupied France. The southern portion of it, he claims, is free. It really isn't. It's called Vichy France, and it's ruled by Pétain. And he definitely supports Hitler. He's pro-German. It's a puppet regime, meaning he got like his job from Hitler, and he's Hitler's puppet. He'll do whatever he wants. It's definitely not free. It's just not as strict as like occupied France, where it's Paris and where Hitler has total control. The true leader of France is Charles de Gaulle, and he goes all the way to Morocco in Africa, and he flees there for safety and for protection, and he leads a resistance movement there. And you can kind of see in this political cartoon, I love this one on the left, you see Hitler coming in, and he says, as if he was a dentist, and it says, "You're next," and he's got like pliers to take out your teeth, kind of creepy. And he's already taken over Czechoslovakia and Austria and Poland and Denmark and Norway and Holland and Belgium and France. And so the last hat, obviously, is Britain, and it's the last person waiting in the waiting room of that dentist's office. But Britain, of course, has its own pliers, and they're going to fight back. So the next big thing is the Battle of Britain. Britain has never been able to fall because it's an island. Even when Napoleon was taking over all of Europe, he was never able to get Britain. And so if Hitler can take Britain, they're going to have a real problem. And of course, they're all appealing to the United States at this point, which is neutral, saying America first, we're not going to get involved. FDR gets reelected, saying he's not going to get involved in the war. We have this cash carry program saying we will sell you supplies, but we're not going to deliver them. There's already a Battle of the Atlantic heating up, right, as we see the British and the French subs basically taking on Hitler. But now that France has fallen, it's basically just British subs against the Germans. And the British do have the best Navy, but the German Navy really has improved as well. And so things are difficult here. Britain is really struggling for supplies and to hang on because most of Europe is falling. And the war is also raging, remember, in Africa, and it's raging in Asia as, Italy is taking over large portions of Africa and Japan is taking over large portions of Asia. And it seems like Hitler and Japan and Russia at this point, Hitler, Tojo, Stalin, and Mussolini, that's the guy I'm forgetting. They're unstoppable. They're basically taking over the world, and perhaps the U.S. should be fearful. Last part to probably, this wraps up section 2 here, this last part about the Battle of Britain, and this would be the last part to probably put on your battles worksheet, is Hitler really focuses his efforts on Great Britain, and he's going to launch Operation Sea Lion, which is going to be an air and sea invasion. The first part of it is going to be launching his Luftwaffe, his Air Force. He takes about 2,800 Air Force, which outnumbers the Royal Air Force, 4-1. And he plans on just bombing the southern portion of England. That's where the Bank of England is located. Really, it's usually in London, but then they move it to the southern portion. He's trying to figure out where they have their own decoding machines and their own agents and their own spies. He's trying to bomb like different strategic locations where he thinks that spies might be living and training, and where they might have where they might be producing their own secret codes to send to operatives. He's interested in bombing factories, so some of the cities on the east. He doesn't really go after London or the King and Queen early on. He's looking for military bases, taking out different places where tanks might be located, things of that nature. And they're also, of course, fighting at sea, as I mentioned. And then the goal is eventually to take out 160,000, maybe even 200,000 German soldiers, launch them, in boats across the English Channel. Now that he has France, which wouldn't be really a far journey at all, people do it all the time, and then have them invade and do hand-to-hand combat. And then eventually, as they take some coastal towns, bring in tanks, and then they figure that it'll just be a matter of time before Britain falls like everything else. Now, he ends up postponing the invasion because even though the RAF has less planes and less soldiers, they are taking out the Luftwaffe. They're well trained. We see some Americans are actually enlisting at this point, and they want to fly, they want to do their part. We see some other people from around the world are coming to help Great Britain. So remember, Britain is this huge empire. They own Australia, New Zealand, India, South Africa. So they're bringing in people from all around the globe to come to Britain to help them to fight, to just, to help defend the major portion of the colony. And Britain starts to really kind of feel it. It's incredibly depressing. It's scary. There's talk of invasion. People are carrying gas masks everywhere. They're terrified that if the Germans do land, that they'll gas them all. They're destroying everything, including the people's morale. At this point, we see a change in leadership. Of course, Neville Chamberlain is no longer in power. It's Winston Churchill, and he is willing to take a much stronger stand against Hitler. He realizes that Hitler needs to be defeated, that anything and everything must be done to stop him. And Hitler decides to take on a new tactic. He decides that since they're not able to pretty much stop the RAF in the air, they're not ready to launch this, invasion with troops, they decide instead, okay, we're going to get the German people, or I should say the British people, to surrender. So he says, I'm going to actually attack the people themselves. Up until now, he's been going after not the king and queen, military bases, factories, maybe a few hospitals, but not just people's houses, not just average, British citizens. This all changes. So in September of 1940 through May of 1941, he starts attacking mostly London because that's the biggest population center. He goes after a few other cities as well, but he literally just bombs them all night once it gets dark, all night long. Basically over the cover of darkness. It was harder to see them, but the Germans also don't know what they're hitting. It's not like they have, all the GPS and, satellite systems and things like today. So they're just randomly coming in the dark, and they just stop dropping bombs anywhere and everywhere. So they're killing rich, poor, old, young, kids, aristocrats, people who are wealthy, nobility in England, anyone and everyone. And the goal was perhaps people will get so depressed, they'll ask Winston Churchill for them to, if they can surrender, if they can give up, that they can't take the strain of the total war. People lost their homes. They started sleeping in subway stations, thinking it was safer underground. They built bomb shelters. On the first day of the Blitz, 430 citizens were killed. The German bombers returned the next day, and a further 412 died. So you can see just, it's pretty much impossible to live your daily life. People are up all night through these bombings, facing horrific events, and then they have to go to work the next day, but they soldier on. They're able to make it through. They tell, Winston Churchill they don't want to surrender. And over time, it seems like the British are somehow going to hang in there, and they're not going to surrender. And the Luftwaffe is not superior to the RAF by any means. And Operation Sea Lion is pretty much a failure. They never actually launch any boats. They never truly invade. There's a couple of different plots where they attempt to take over the government and they send in spies, but nothing ever really happens where they're able to take over the government. But at this time, the British are still barely hanging on, and they're desperately asking the Americans, can't you send us supplies? Can't you do anything? Can't you help us? Besides giving us, a few guns here and there, we're barely hanging on there against this monster. And so this is kind of a moral victory for the Allies, but overall, there are no victories truly at this point. It's more of just a stalemate, if anything. And part of the reason why the RAF was able to hold on for so long was they finally developed radar, so they at least know when the bombings are coming, and they're able to give out a warning to people so they can go to their bomb shelters if they can. And so we do see some advances with technology and things of that nature, but still it's pretty rough overall. Ooh, and just so you can see some pictures, maybe. I don't know where. Okay, so here's Big Ben, and you can see that it's covered with barbed wire, and people tried to make sure that you couldn't get close to like historic landmarks and such, and they evacuated the king and queen to the countryside because they figured maybe Hitler might target some of these objects, or maybe they just might get destroyed at night. And if that's the case, they're huge, they'll go down, they'll take out lots of people, so they wanted to keep people away. They tried to sandbag a lot of buildings, perhaps to stop the destruction from increasing. Maybe it wouldn't fall as hard, as heavy. Maybe they could save some buildings. And then they would have people who would stand out at night and they would look for planes in the sky. They would, have blackout curtains, so they would tell everyone to close all their blinds, put out, there should be no lights on at night. Everything has to be a complete blackout so that there's no light. Otherwise, if there would be a light, then the Germans would purposely target, that area because they would know people were alive there and they would try to kill them. And it sounds gruesome, and it is. Large portions of the city were constantly on fire each day. So they needed volunteers to be ambulance workers and work in the fire department. And that was a lot of women for the most part, since men were off fighting. You can see people down there who've lost their homes, they've lost everything, living down in these subways. You can see just the destruction, and of course, kids stopped going to school, they were evacuated to the countryside. Some of them later came back because their families missed them. In some cases, that was a mistake, because they later died in the Blitz. But life was definitely disrupted during this time period, and people tried to go on with their business as best they could. So overall, Hitler pretty much seemed unstoppable, though. The Axis powers start to really move into North Africa and into, they go from Greece and they take that over, and then they're moving now into North Africa, trying to go through Egypt into Libya. And that would be the Italians and the Germans for the most part. And in Japan, of course, Tojo is interested in trying to take over China. He's going to spend all of the war there, but then he's going to be moving further into Southeast Asia. He's looking for countries that have oil, that it's easy to take over, so that they can have this greater East Asia co-prosperity sphere, so they can control anyone and everyone. Part of the reason why they're so successful in Africa is because the German general named Rommel, they call him the Desert Fox because, they wear uniforms that kind of blend in more with the sand. He's sneaky. He's one of Hitler's great buddies. He knows about great battle tactics. He uses, tanks and the lack of resources there and the lack of, elements to hide behind, but still figures out how to fight. And so they're able to take Tunisia, Libya, Egypt, you name it. And so they're really able to expand their empire. This is truly a world war at this point. And, Britain is trying to send a lot of their South African troops and a lot of the territory that they own in Africa. They're trying to send those troops in to fight with the locals, but it's definitely difficult as, Mussolini is pretty much expanding, his reign and controlling everywhere. Everything, of course, starts to change, though, because we're going to see that Germany then decides to attack the Soviet Union in June in 1941 and to break their promise, mostly because they had planned on doing it eventually anyway. And so he was just waiting for the right moment until he pretty much conquered all of Western Europe. So then he starts to attack Russia, and his plan is to inflict heavy casualties. He's still going to use Blitzkrieg. He didn't trust Stalin. He thought Stalin was going to stab him in the back, so he did it first. And he'd already talked about this, as I said, in his book Mein Kampf, about how he wanted Lebensraum, living space. He begins the attack June 22nd, hoping that it will be done by the winter, and boy, was he wrong. So Operation Barbarossa is what he titles his attack. He's got about 3,400 tanks, about 3 million men, And he thinks he's going to be able to do it easily since he's been able to take over the rest of Europe without a problem. And he decides that he is going to head towards Leningrad as opposed to Moscow, which was a mistake. He should have went to Moscow where the capital was. Perhaps he would have had better luck there. Perhaps he could have, forced some kind of political takedown. But instead, he divides his troops and he sends a large portion of his troops to Leningrad. Some he sends south down into like what's more Ukraine because there's some oil there. And then some he kind of sends towards the middle, towards Moscow, but it's just not enough. And so by dividing up the troops, it was a mistake because the Russians are going to go back to the Napoleonic policies of what we call scorched earth, where literally they decide to burn their own towns, destroy their own fields, and then move and go live with strangers or just move east so that literally by the time the Germans show up, there's no food, there's no farm, there's no house. It's just complete snow and ice for miles. So they're going to start losing their morale. They won't come across people to fight. There's no food to eat. There's nowhere to rest. They're going to be running short on supplies, and it's going to be difficult. And then once they do come across the Russians, they see that the Russians are crazy, and they will fight for Mother Russia to the death, and it's going to be very difficult. In fact, the Battle of Leningrad goes on for a few years, starting in 41 all the way through 1944, where the people literally, as they are surrounded, are willing to eat rats. They are willing to turn to cannibalism and eat dead bodies. They will do whatever it takes to survive, which is pretty gruesome. It goes on for over 900 days. 650,000 people die. Eventually, the Soviets will go on the offensive as they gain extra troops and be able to take their land back. But it's pretty wild. But it goes on for years, really just showing you kind of the resolve of the Russians. So Hitler is wrong. It's not going to be able to take Russia easily because he doesn't realize how cold it is there. How even the oil is going to freeze. I shouldn't say the oil is going to freeze, but they're going to be running out of supplies more, and just other materials will freeze, and his men will freeze to death. Pneumonia will set in, exhaustion, infection, and it'll be difficult for them to fight back. And that's it for now, guys. Have a great day. Later.